you would, take your Bibles and join me once again in the Gospel of John, chapter number 7. And I want to pick right up where we left off. We stopped at verse number 13 last time, and I want to pick right up at verse number 14 this week. It says that Jesus was in the middle of this feast, and I had talked a little bit about this feast last week. It's the Feast of Tabernacles. Sometimes it's referred to as the Feast of Booths. Sometimes it's referred to as the Feast of Ingatherings. If you're in Jerusalem, they just call it Sukkah, and there's other titles that are given to it, Sukkah, and other ways of pronouncing it by different groups of people. And it is the great feast of the Jewish people. It's the last of the feast of the year, and it is the last of the harvest feast for the Jewish people, most typically throughout their history. It is the time of year where the grapes are harvested and the olives are harvested. Very symbolic time. And then throughout the summer you have the wheat harvest and the field harvest that comes in. It's all of the feasts, by the way, and I'll probably say a little bit about this in next week, maybe in the weeks ahead as well. These feasts of the Old Testament for the Jewish people, they all prophetically point to future things. And this one in particular is dear to my heart because it points to the return of Christ. It points to the establishment of His kingdom, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And here's Jesus at this feast, and it's a lovely time of year. It's around this time. In fact, the Feast of Tabernacles is just a few weeks away for us on our calendar, and it's a wonderful time to be in Jerusalem. It's the time of year when the fall rains begin to come in. This morning we kind of saw our first rain, I guess you could say, for the fall season. And it's about the same thing for the Jewish people. So it's a time that they get excited about, particularly in the ancient culture. Rain is a big deal, particularly if you live in a dry climate and they don't have irrigation like we do. It is something of wonder and beauty and something that they look forward to all summer long when the rains come back. That's another reason why the Feast of Tabernacles was such a glorious thing. They're waiting for the rain of heaven to come and to refresh the ground. And that typically takes place around the time of the Feast of Tabernacles. It's also a time just for the entire nation to come together. This is one of the 3 feasts that Jewish men were required to be at. And this was the last one of the year. So Jerusalem will be packed. I've been in Jerusalem during the Feast of Tabernacles, and it's a madhouse. It's literally the whole nation is a can of sardines. Everybody's squished in, and it's chaos everywhere you go. And it's been like that for thousands of years. Everybody comes together and they stuff themselves into the old city of Jerusalem, and they're celebrating and they're blowing horns and they're eating and they're feasting and they're just enjoying everyone's company together. I told you last week, this feast is similar to, let's say, us taking Christmas camping and Thanksgiving and squishing them all together. That's what the Feast of Tabernacles was like for the Jewish people. It was a time of gifts being given, and they decorated, and they put up, decorations all over the place, and they celebrated for 7 days, and they built these little booths, these tents, and they took leaves and branches, and they would make these little huts, and they would eat and live in those huts for the 7 days, so it's like camping. And they would cook out the entire time, and they just sat around and ate and talked and celebrated and have fun, and so that's kind of like Thanksgiving. And it's just all these wonderful things. And you can imagine for the Jewish people, they always looked forward to the Feast of Tabernacles. Like that was the grand thing of the year. It's just, I can't wait to get together with everybody and the fun that is going to come along with this. You might think a lot of times. Western Christians always think that the holiday that Jewish people look forward to is the Passover. And that would be wrong. They hate that feast. Most Jews would rather not participate in it. They despise the feast of Passover because it's all ritualistic and it's so long and drawn out and boring, and they have to sit at this table and read all this stuff and quote all these things and do all these things, and almost none of them have any idea what it even means. They just do it because that's what they've always done for years and years, and they can't wait for it to be over. That's the Feast of Passover for them. But that's not how they look at the Feast of Tabernacles. They look forward to it. It is a great celebration. And this is where Jesus is at. Verse number 2 says, now the Jews' Feast of the Tabernacles was at hand. Verse number 11 says, Then the Jews sought him at the feast. Verse number 14 says, now about the middle of the feast. Verse number 37 says, on the last day of the great day of the feast. So this entire chapter surrounds this feast, as I had mentioned. And it's broken up into three parts. What takes place, these arguments, these debates that Jesus has before the feast begins. These debates and arguments that Jesus has during the feast. And then debates and arguments of what happens at the end of the feast. And we looked at what happened before the feast. It is Jesus' own brothers who do not believe in him and who are trying to get him to go to the Feast of Tabernacles. And it seems they have evil intentions for it. And Jesus obviously doesn't follow their evil intentions and tells them to go on to the feast and he'll catch up with them later. And verse number 10 says this, but when his brothers had gone up, then he also went up to the feast, not openly, but as it were in secret. So he goes by himself. This is an odd time for Jesus because he has been surrounded by thousands of people for almost 2 years now. He has had his disciples by his side everywhere he has gone. There has always been the crowds of people pressing in to get to talk to him, to touch him, to be healed by him, to see a miracle by him. It's been so bad lately for Jesus that he has not been able to sleep. He has not been able to eat. He can't even escape these crowds. Every time he crisscrosses over the Sea of Galilee, there's another crowd waiting for him there, and he's just not able to get away from these people. And yet when it comes to this particular situation, he manages to be by himself. And there's a reason for this. It is not his time to die. He must go to Jerusalem because that's the right thing to do. That is the biblical requirement for all Jewish men. He must be there. But it's not time for him to be crucified. That's 6 months into the future. And he, at this point, needs to go to Jerusalem. He needs to present himself to them again as the Messiah. He needs to preach to them. And he needs to do it in such a way to where they do not arrest him. They do not capture him and crucify him like they so long to do. And so he goes, you could say, incognito, it says there in verse number 10. In verse number 12, it says this, and there was much complaining among the people concerning him. Some said, he is good. And others said, no, on the contrary, he deceives the people. And there's a split among those who are in Jerusalem. Obviously, this is now the crowds are beginning to grow. We're several days, no doubt, into the feast. And all of those that are traveling from southern Israel and northern Israel and eastern Israel and western Israel and all around, they're coming into the city of Jerusalem. And they're all sitting around talking to each other about this guy. Did you hear about the guy Jesus? Oh man, let me tell you, I heard all these stories about even raising people from the dead. Oh, I heard he walked on water. Oh, I was told that he fed 5,000 people, or probably even more than that, on the side of a hill up there in the Galilean area. Did you hear about that? Oh man, I've been hearing all kinds of crazy stories. What do you think about him? You think he's the Messiah? You think he's, well, he was here 6 months ago at the Passover. He was here celebrating. He began to teach at the temple stairs, and our rulers told him to go away. Our rulers said that he was a deceiver. And there was this mixed conversation. You got all of these people, particularly those coming from 60 miles north there in the Galilean area, who have been watching and listening to Jesus for months now. And they're convinced he is the Messiah. And as soon as they can, they would like to inaugurate him and crown him as king of the Jewish people. And they're coming into Jerusalem and they're talking to all the other people. They're talking to all of the city people of Jerusalem and saying, what do you think about him? Where's he at, by the way? Surely he would be here by now. I thought that when we arrived that maybe an announcement would already be made that he was king and that the Sanhedrin would have crowned him by now. Where is he at? And everybody's looking for him and everybody's talking about him. And obviously, according to verse number 43, it says, so there was a division among the people because of him. There's a lot of division about Jesus. Always has been, always will be. There'll never be a time in your life or in the life of your grandchildren or great-grandchildren or whatever in the future, if there is a future, there'll never be a time where people are not divided over the person of Christ. There'll never be a time when people are not divided over their opinions of who he was and what he did and what he said. There'll never be a time when Jesus isn't the type of person who brings conflict and division, even within homes. He said that of himself. That was part of his message. He told his disciples that if you preach me, there are going to be sons and daughters who are not going to agree with you, and there are going to be husbands and wives that are not going to agree with each other, and there will be division, and there will be persecution, and there will be hardship based on me. There always has been, and there always will be. And here Jesus comes, it says in verse number 14, now about the middle of the feast. So probably about 3 or 4 days into the feast. By this time, everyone has now made their way into the city. For a lot of people, it's a long journey, particularly those who are living outside of Israel, having to travel from Rome or somewhere far away. Now, time has been given for everyone to make their way into Jerusalem. And Jesus kind of, I'd kind of like to know, what was he doing those first couple of days? Walking around with his hoodie on, just kind of staying low, listening to what people are talking about, sitting in the crowds, listening to them talk about who he is, and he's just he's staying down low. He doesn't want to get caught. He doesn't want to be seen. He doesn't want to be arrested. And he's just kind of keeping his ear open to what all of the people are saying about him. And yet in the very middle of this feast, he stands, it says, verse 14, Jesus went up into the temple and taught. Jesus is God, but he's also man. And you know that Jesus felt the weight of certain decisions and things that needed to be done. When he's in the garden before his crucifixion, he's praying and he's sweating, as it were, great drops of blood, and he feels the weight of what he's about to experience. And no doubt there's the sense of anxiety that goes along with that. He has a peace in God's plan. He has a peace in God's will, but that doesn't stop him from praying, Lord, if there's any other way, could you do this another way? Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. It reveals the humanity of Christ. Nobody likes to suffer. Nobody likes to be persecuted. Nobody likes to go through pain and agony, neither did Jesus. But Jesus is a man of courage. Jesus is a man of great boldness. And I can only imagine as he stands in the temple, a place where only the rabbis were allowed, and not only that, but the highest of the rabbis. It was a position where only those who had gained the trust and the worthiness, the credentials, you could say, to be able to stand in the temple and to teach. And he does it. He stands, knowing full well that all of the Sanhedrin wants him dead, and as soon as he is spotted, he's going to be arrested. And so he stands in the temple and he teaches. It's a very bold move. In fact, verse number 26 tells us that. It says, "But look, he speaks boldly, and they say nothing to him. Do the rulers know?" They say, "Well, look at this man. There he is. Speak of the devil." Not. Here he is. He's teaching in the temple. What a bold move for him. He's probably going to get arrested. Do the rulers know what's going on? Somebody, go, quick, catch them. Go tell them. Here he is. Go get the temple police. It's amazing to me that this is what he does. He comes in and he teaches. He doesn't come in and perform a bunch of miracles. He did that, by the way, 6 months ago. 6 months ago, he was in Jerusalem. He was there for the Passover meal. And if you remember, at that time, he was teaching and preaching on the steps of the temple. And he was performing miracles. The Bible doesn't tell us what kind of miracles, but he was performing miracles. And everyone who was listening and hearing him at that time was convinced that maybe this is the Messiah. Nobody can do the things that he is doing. And yet there was something that Jesus did that turned all of the religious leaders off of him. When it came time for the sacrifices in the temple, when it came time for the Passover sacrifice, Jesus sees the debauchery that's going on in the temple, and with his righteous indignation, he runs in, he overturns the tables, he turns the money changers and pushes them out of the temple, and he says, "You've turned my house, the house of prayer, into a house of thieves." And so They're angry at him because of that. And if that wasn't enough to make them angry, there was one thing that Jesus did. There was one thing that Jesus did that pushed them over the edge. And when he did that one thing, they said, enough is enough. This man must die. And they devoted their entire attention and focus from that point on to making sure that he is executed. And if you're wondering what that one thing is, on the Sabbath, Jesus at the pool of Bethesda healed a man, made him fully healthy again. And the rest of us in the room would go, what a wonderful thing to do. On a Saturday, he saw a man who needed help, and he helped him. That should be applauded. That should be praised. What a glorious thing to do. And yet, for everyone living in Jerusalem, that was the one thing that pushed them over the edge. How dare he? How could he? The audacity of healing someone on the Sabbath. And you have all these people getting their pitchforks out, and they're ready to crucify him because he did a good deed on Saturday. Well, that kind of sets us up for what's about to take place here. And what John is going to do in these next couple of verses, he's going to present to us the opinions of the people. And like I said, everybody has their opinion about Jesus. They still do today. And they typically fall into categories of types of people. And John does just that. People do not ever change. It doesn't matter what generation you live in or what geographical location you live in. People's opinions of Jesus really never change. And a lot of times it's based off of the environment that you grew up in. The first group of people that he presents to us is in verse number 15, the Jews. And this is just the common people of the nation. The Jews of Galilee, the Jews there of southern Judea, the Jews that live all around the entire nation. This is the blue collar, typically illiterate, farmers, workers, just your average Joe Blow, your common people. And they have their opinions. And they've been watching him in the Nazareth area, the Galilee area. They have been watching him as he's been preaching and teaching. And they certainly have positive opinions of him, but there's others that are negative opinions of him. And you have those of the common people, what they think of Jesus. In verse number 25, John introduces to us some of those from Jerusalem. This would be the city people. Jerusalem, those that lived into Jerusalem, typically never left it. They never went outside of the walls, per se. Their houses were right there in downtown. They kind of lived downtown. All of their jobs, their functions were downtown. And they were just your city people. They're metropolitan people. And there's always been this case, and it always will be, that those who live in dense urban areas always think a little bit differently than those that live in countryside. Politics never change from generation to generation. You can look at an American map and see that it is red and it is blue, depending typically on metropolitan locations. That's always been true in human nature, no matter where you look throughout human history. There is a difference in thinking depending on your environment. And unfortunately, it's always been the case that the denser the population, the bigger the city, the more minds collaborating on top of each other, it becomes more corroded and more corrupt and more evil with time. This is why time and time again throughout human history, God has had to destroy certain large cities. As they've gotten larger and larger, they became more and more sinful. And we see that happening even in our own lifetime. It's just a repeating nature of humanity. And so you get the opinion of the city people. In verse number 32, he presents the Pharisees and the chief priests. These would be your religious and political leaders. They had differences with each other, very, very stark differences with each other. In fact, the Pharisees and the Sadducees despised each other. They hated each other, even though they were both religious leaders in their own Jewish community. And you had the Sanhedrin, you had the scribes, you had all of these individuals who were the elite. They were the rich individuals. They were the ones who had power and authority and prestige and honor and respect in society. And obviously, those who have power have their opinion of Jesus as well. So what I want to do this morning is just kind of as fast as I can plow through some of these verses and give you kind of a perspective of what these individuals thought of Jesus. And the first opinion, as I said, is the common people. Look at verse number 15, if you would. Their first opinion of Jesus is that he probably doesn't know what he's talking about. That's their first opinion. He probably doesn't know what he's talking about. Look at verse 15. It says, "And the Jews marveled, saying, 'How does this man know letters, having never studied?'" Their first opinion of him is, this is amazing. We've been to Jerusalem many times, and the rabbis, the scribes, they'll stand and they'll teach, and their credentials are enormous. At the time of this writing, when Jesus was in Jerusalem, there was anywhere from 30 plus seminaries, rabbinical seminaries in Jerusalem. And if anyone was ever going to rise in power to be able to be a teacher, a leader among the Jewish people, they had to graduate from one of these seminaries, particularly to graduate from one of the prestigious ones. This is why later on, when Paul came along, he said, I studied under Gamaliel. He was one of the greatest of the professors of one of these seminaries. And he said, you should listen to what I have to say. I have a great education. And yet you have Jesus here. And they're asking the question, he has no degree. He hasn't gone to any of these schools. There is no famous professor. There is no famous rabbi that he studied under. And yet he stands and he speaks with authority. He stands and he speaks truth as if he's the author of it. Of course, we know that he is. And they're confused by him. They say, should we even listen to this guy? He's not a doctor of theology like these other folks. He doesn't have the pedigree that they do. Can anyone really know the truth of God who hasn't been through one of these schools? Is kind of their attitude. And notice Jesus' response to them, verse 16. Jesus answered them and said, "My doctrine is not mine, but his who sent me." My doctrine is not my doctrine, he says. It belongs to him who sent me. Of course, Jesus did all the things that pleased the Father, and he came with a message from the Father. And he served his entire life as a man, submissively as a man. He set aside temporarily his deity to function entirely as a man. And so he says, I'm not telling you something that I made up. It comes from heaven. He says in verse number 17, if anyone wills to do his will, he shall know concerning the doctrine. And he says, you can know these things too. This is not limited to just famous rabbis. This is not limited to just those who teach and train in one of these seminaries. Anyone who wills to do God's will can know these things, can know these doctrines. It's made available and accessible to all people, which this is a wonderful truth, isn't it? All of you can take your Bibles home and study it, and God can speak to you, and he can teach you, and you can learn, and you grow. It's a wonderful privilege that God has given us. Someone once said that obedience is the door by which revelation enters. If you really want to know God's will, if you really want to know and understand God's truths, then simply be obedient to the light that you've already been presented. God doesn't give you all of the light of heaven immediately. He gives you a little light, and if you follow that light, he gives you more. He is a light unto your path. And if you're obedient, if you are following God's truth, then he'll give you more revelation. And Jesus says to this crowd, if you want to know the things that I know, if you want to understand the doctrines that I understand, you have access to it as well. All of you can learn and know these things. You're just simply choosing to not be obedient to it. You're not following the will of God. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse number 29 says this, "But from there you will seek the Lord your God, and you will find him if you seek him with all of your heart and with all of your soul." And very similar passages are like that all throughout the Bible. For those who seek God with all of their heart, mind, body, and soul, he will reveal himself to them. He will reveal truth to them. No one truly, legitimately seeking truth will God withhold it from them. God is always anxious and ready to give truth to anyone who really wants to find it. But the Jewish people obviously were not looking for it. And Jesus, in verse number 18, reveals that there are two things that are always true about false teachers. They're claiming that he's a false teacher. He probably doesn't know what he's talking about. He hasn't studied under the proper individuals. And so maybe he's a false teacher. And so Jesus says in verse number 18, there are two things that are always true about false teachers. He who speaks from himself seeks his own glory, But he who seeks the glory of the one who sent him is true, and no unrighteousness is in him. Those two things are always true. Any person that comes on their own authority, own revelation, their own truth, I immediately turn off any pastor, any evangelist says, well, listen to my truth, or the revelation that I've been given, or I have something new you've never heard before. That's immediately a red flag saying, okay, this is someone coming in their own authority, with their own truth, not coming with the truth of God. They are not trying to be messengers, they are trying to create the message. And that is never the case for a preacher. So those that come in their own authority, and then he says, seeking his own glory. Anyone that comes in their own authority is always looking for their own glory. They're always wanting to be seen. They're always wanting to be praised. They're always wanting to be honored. And no doubt, certainly that is the case with all the Pharisees and the Sadducees and those in the Sanhedrin. They wanted to be known. They wanted to be praised in the marketplace. They wanted to have the chief seats. They wanted themselves really to be the Messiah. They wanted to be the Savior of the people. And Jesus says, that's not me. That's not what I'm doing. I'm not seeking my own glory. I'm not presenting my own truth. I am simply bringing to you what the Father has given me to give to you. And that is true for us today as well. That's all we do in ministry, by the way. All we do is bring to others what God has given to us. Nothing more, nothing less. There's no reason for me to add to the Bible. There's no reason for me to take away from the Bible. The only thing that is beneficial to you or to anyone else in the world is to simply give you what God has already given us. And so he tells them, I'm not coming in my own authority and I'm not seeking my own glory, at least not at this point. There will become a time when that is true. At this point in his ministry, he is the Lamb of God. He is the sacrificial servant. He is the one who has come to be righteousness and sanctification for all people. If you would look at verse number 19. There's another opinion that these people have of him, that he probably has a demon. That's the reason he's saying the things. He's probably demonic. Notice what they say to him. Verse number 19 says, Jesus still speaking says, did not Moses give you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law? Which, by the way, that is the entire foundation of the gospel. I could spend an entire sermon on verse number 19. I'm not going to. Let me word it in a way that makes a little bit more sense to you. He says, do you not know what is good? Let me ask you that question. Do you know what is good? Do you have any concept of what is good? Do you have any understanding of what is good? The next question is what brings the gospel into perspective. Then why are you not good? If you know what is good, you're aware of what is good, and yet you are not good, then there's something wrong with you. It's not intellectual. It is spiritual. It's not because you don't know. It's not because you haven't tried hard enough. You've known for a long time and you've tried to be good and you still failed, so you're not good. So there's something wrong with you. You need to be fixed. There's nothing wrong with the law. There's nothing wrong with the knowledge of what is good. The problem is you cannot become it. There is no ability on your own to be good. This is the whole basis of the gospel. The gospel, the good news, is that somebody is good for you. And somebody can be the payment for your crimes, your sins. You know what is good. You don't do what is good. You are not good, but someone came to be good and do good for you. And so Jesus is making this very clear to them. You're sinners. That's ultimately what he's saying. You're sinners. And you don't see it. You don't recognize it. You're trying to say that I'm a sinner, and yet you're the one that's a sinner. And he gives them proof by asking them another question. Why do you seek to kill me? If you know what is good, thou shalt not murder, why are you trying to murder me? And yet, they seem like they don't know what's going on. In verse number 20, it says, the people answered and said, you have a demon. Who is seeking to kill you? Now, this is obviously referring back to the common people who haven't been in Jerusalem. They haven't been hearing the word that When you see him, we want to arrest him, because they're asking the questions like, what are you talking about? You must have a demon in you. Nobody's trying to kill you. Nobody's against you. And yet, oddly enough, all around them, all of the religious leaders and those living in Jerusalem, they certainly are against him. And so Jesus says in verse number 21, Jesus answered and said to them, I did one work, and you all marveled. The one work that he's referring to is back in John 5, the pool of Bethesda, where Jesus healed the individual. Jesus says, I did that one thing. I did one miracle in your sight. I did one good deed in your sight. And you all marveled at it, and then you turned against me. And you determined that you were going to kill me. In John chapter 5, verse number 18, it reminds us of that. Therefore the Jews sought all the more to kill him, because he not only broke the Sabbath, but also said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. So they wanted him dead. So in verse number 22, Jesus said, Moses therefore gave you circumcision. Not that it is from Moses, but from the fathers. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses should not be broken, are you angry with me because I made a man completely well on the Sabbath? Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. What Jesus is telling them is this, that you think that Moses gave you a law about circumcision. That didn't come from Moses. That came from the fathers. That was before Moses. That was long before. That came to Abraham. That was long before Moses. And yet you accredit it to Moses. So before the law was written, before the law was established, God had given a direction, a command. And yet you are willing to break the laws of Moses in order to do something that was not even a law given through Moses. In other words, what he's pointing out their hypocrisy. You'll circumcise on the 8th day a young boy because that's what you believe Moses has told you to do. And you're willing to break a law for that ceremonial thing. And here I am. You're going to hurt, you're going to injure, you're going to inflict pain on a child, breaking the law in doing so on the Sabbath. And here I am, I did a good deed. I healed, I made a man whole on the Sabbath, and somehow that's worse? Somehow that's worthy of death? Somehow I should be crucified because I did a good deed on the Sabbath? So he says, don't judge according to appearance, judge with righteous judgment. Judge according to what is right. Judge according to what is true. Not based off of your traditions and your opinions. Well, I'm out of time here, so I need to read these next couple of verses real quick here. Verse number 25, you see the opinion of a different group of people. This is the opinion of the city people, those living in Jerusalem. It says, now some of them from Jerusalem said, is this not he whom they seek to kill? But look, he speaks boldly, and they say nothing to him. Do the rulers know indeed that this is truly the Christ? Now their opinion of Jesus is very, very different from the opinion of the common folks. Their opinion is this: we need the experts to tell us what to think. We don't know what to think. We need the experts to give us an opinion on what to think. Notice their emphasis here. Is this not he whom they seek to kill? But look, he speaks boldly, and they say nothing. Do the rulers know indeed that this truly is the Christ? They're questioning the rulers. They're questioning the experts. This man is teaching in the temple. Where are the experts? They're not saying anything. They're not speaking up. They're not chiming in to tell us what we should think about this message and this teaching. And by the way, I thought they wanted him dead. I thought that he was supposed to be crucified. And here they stand. They're not saying anything. Why are they keeping silent? Are they beginning to believe that he's the Messiah? Are they convinced that he's the Christ and they're not telling us? They've been telling us something different for months now. And here he stands teaching in the temple and they're perfectly fine with it. So they're confused. They need the experts to speak to them. They need the doctors. They need the professors. They need such and such. Years ago, I remember trying to work with an individual, a certain Christian in our church, and I couldn't get anywhere with this individual. No matter what I said, everything was always, the response was always, well, Dr. such and such said, and well, that verse seems like it says that, but Dr. such and such said, and Dr. such and such taught me this, and I read that Dr. such and such was this, and Dr. such and such said that, and Dr. such, I was like, just stop with Dr. such and such from the 70s. What does the Bible say? Is the passage that I'm reading really saying what it's saying, or is it not? What matters about some guy from the 70s and what he said? But this is always the way we think, isn't it? Well, I need an expert to tell me what to believe. I need someone with credentials to give me the insight. Christians today are always that way. Well, it sounds like what you're saying is good, but I'll have to verify that with, John Calvin and see what he had to say. I'll do some Googling and see if Luther agreed with you. I've listened to sermons where Bible teachers would go through and they would teach a passage, and in order for their audience to understand that this passage is true and that this passage means what it says, they will fill their sermon with lots of quotes from John Calvin and Martin Luther to verify that it is true. What Jesus said is really what Jesus said because some guys 500 years ago agreed with it. And now that their stamp of approval is on it, then we can all agree that it is true. Why is it that people always have to follow people, and it's so hard for us just to simply follow God? It's so hard for us just to simply follow the truths that are blatantly clear on the passages of Scripture that was given to us. And so their opinion was, well, we don't have an opinion yet. We're waiting for the opinion makers to tell us what to think. We're waiting for the elites, the teachers, the doctors to tell us what to think. However, even that's not true. Because the very next verse, verse number 27, this is their response. However, we know where this man is from. But when the Christ comes, no one knows where he is from. In other words, what they're saying is like, we really want our leaders to tell us what to think. But at the end of the day, we know what we think too. We really know what we believe. We believe that when the Christ comes, no one will know where he comes from. And this is a loose misunderstanding from Isaiah 53, verse number 8, which says, who will declare him in his generations, which basically they misinterpret it to mean that no one will know who he is, that he'll just magically appear. Some of the early church fathers even believe this as well, that it's kind of strange that so many people knew him because that was not the traditional belief. That is not what the Jewish people believed for so many centuries, that when he appears, it'll just be quick and he'll be here. And you'll not know where he came from, and you'll not be able to trace his lineage. And so it's a misunderstanding of the Old Testament prophets. But they're very bold in it. They're like, at the end of the day, we really don't even need the experts, do we? We know the Bible. We know what it says. And yet their eyes are so blinded to the truth of the Scripture that they misinterpret it, which, by the way, is not because of them. That's what they were taught to believe. They were told to see the Scriptures that way. If you stop listening to the experts, maybe you'll start interpreting the Bible a little bit correctly. One of the things I appreciate the most from my dad, when I was a young boy, and although I didn't want to read the Bible, I didn't care about the Bible at the time, but he made me read the Bible, which I appreciate. He made me read the Bible, and he told me every time you read the Bible, you don't ever just open it up and start reading. You never do that. Never. Don't ever, in the entirety of your life, just ever open the Bible and just start reading. He said, that's God's words, and it's inspired by the Holy Spirit, and God wrote it. And God knows what it means, and God understands it more than anybody. if you're going to read the Bible, you open your Bible and you pray to the author of that Bible. You pray to the God of that Bible and you say, help me to understand. I'm going to read your words. I'm going to read your thoughts. And I can't know what you mean until you help me know what you mean. I want to see it the way you want me to see it. I want to understand it the way you want me to understand it. And I would encourage anyone, if you're going to open your Bible, make that your regular exercise. Open your Bible and say, Lord, these are your words, not mine. Your thoughts, not my thoughts. Give me eyes to see things the way you see them. And read that way. That was free. Verse number 27. However, we know that this man is from, or we know where this man is from. They believe he's born and raised in Nazareth, even though that's not true. He doesn't correct them, by the way. He doesn't say, well, no, I was born in Bethlehem. And I was born in the right Bethlehem, not the northern one, the southern one. And he says, so they say, well, we know where he's from. But Jesus answers in verse number 28, and he cries out. So he raises his voice, and he taught in the temple, saying, you both know me, and you know where I am from, and I have not come of myself, but he who sent me is true, whom you do not know, but I know him, for I am from him, and he sent me. Therefore they sought to take him, but no one laid a hand on him, because his hour had not yet come. They wanted him dead after hearing that. Jesus told them, you know who I am. Stop denying it. Nobody can raise the dead. No man can raise the dead. You have heard, you have seen. No man can walk on water. You have heard and you have seen. No man can magically feed thousands and thousands of people. You have heard and you have seen. No man can say the things that I am saying. No man has seen the things that I have seen. In fact, even when the temple police go to arrest Jesus, they stand there and they listen to him in awe, and they walk back to their leaders and say, no man's ever talked like this man before. We can't arrest him. Maybe he is who he says he is. And Jesus said, you know who I am. Stop denying it. I am the God-man. I am the Messiah. And I was sent to you from God in heaven. I came from heaven. And that was enough. That was what pushed him over the edge the first time, if you remember. Back in chapter number 5, they said, he's making himself equal with God. He must die. And here he is once again, letting all of these individuals in Jerusalem know, I am that I am. I am the Messiah, and you've rejected me. Well, I had a lot further that I wanted to go this morning, and I just can't seem to make it happen. So we're going to have to close that right there, and you're going to have to hear me repeat some of this again next week. I was thinking this morning as I was studying this passage, I have never personally heard a sermon preached on this section of Scripture. And I was wondering why. And I think the reason might be it's not a very preachy text. It's more of a teachy passage. And unless you grew up in a church that is expository, which is like us, we don't skip anything, you're probably never going to hear sections like this. So I'm glad that you're able to hear it, even though it may not feel as preachy, it may be teachy, and you understand, you need that. And let me remind you, if Jesus saw it so necessary to put his life on the line, to stand up, and to do what it said in the text, to teach, Jesus taught the Word of God. Jesus was always a teacher of the Word of God. And if Jesus believed that the number one necessary thing for people was for them to hear God's Word taught, then that's still true today as well. That is